Hello and welcome to week 11 in biopsychology. And we have two chapters that we're going to be doing this week. The first chapter, chapter 9, wakefulness and sleep. We're talking about this kind of a states of consciousness. If we look at this from the introduction to psychology course, you took a chapter called states of consciousness, kind of building on those ideas here. In the discussion, I want you to reflect upon the times in which you have been in a learning situation, let's say a classroom or a lecture or something like that, and you're bored. Just like, okay. But yet, you understand as a good student that you have to be able to sustain attention during boring lectures. The information might still be important for you to reflect on an exam or to learn how to do a particular task, even though you don't find it particularly interesting. How do you use the technique? What techniques do you use to try and stay engaged? It might take a little trip every once in a while in imagination land with some daydreaming, but the good student will come back in and exercise particular tasks in order to keep themselves awake. So I want you to focus on learning situations in which you become more engaged in the learning. Maybe this is something you need to work on. Maybe you find yourself distracted when you're in those boring situations and you end up missing important work, even though you may not be very interested in it. So maybe look up some ways in which you might be able to engage yourself in a task that keeps your brain active, even though the default mechanism would be to feel bored. In the Chapter 9 quiz, I'm asking you to reflect on information you can gather from the circadian rhythms circle, or the chart that I have, that I'm asking questions about particular aspects of our physical cycles and how we can make observations of behavior based on those. We then switch into sort of a related one, and that's internal regulation. It's the process by which our body communicates to us when we're in need of nutrition and drinking and maintaining body temperature and all of these things, signals that come from our body that elicit responses from us that enable us to stay alive. So in the discussion, we're going to talk about food and our relationship with food. And the world of psychology has looked very deeply at this. Eating disorders are widespread across the nation, as obesity and anorexia and bulimia and the different sort of disorders that can come from that, yet alone a very widespread, just sort of disordered relationship with food, binge eating and the not eating the right kind of food, avoiding good food, and the amount of salt and sugar that's in our regular everyday diet. These kinds of things. We have a relationship with food that has been manufactured and is part of our society right now. So I want you to look at how media affects our relationship with food. What do we associate with food? And if you think about from a sort of a evolutionary perspective, food simply gives us what we need to survive. It gives us our nutrients, gives us our vitamins in order for our bodies to continue operating. But food and eating is way bigger than that now. In our modern society, food has become something. It's entertainment. It's exploratory. We have more choices of different kinds of foods. We have the availability of foods from all over the world as opposed to foods that's just within our local ecosystem. Food is a very, very different thing, and food is used as a social mechanism. So I want you to reflect on the role media has played on that. How does media play and emphasize food as something else besides just us getting our nutrition? That's the discussion. The quiz, I'm asking you two questions. One is about thirst and one is about hunger. And I want you, similar to the way we've been describing neural pathways, I want you to describe the pathways involved in our experience of becoming thirsty. This means getting into some of the biology, anatomy, and chemistry. The same is with hunger. And the example I use with hunger is the notion of a Thanksgiving dinner. I use that one because in my world, in my culture, that's one of my favorite meals. That combination of foods is one of my favorite meals. And there are lots of reasons, lots of input, lots of internal mechanisms that cause me to overeat on Thanksgiving. What are those things? Describe them in relation to the mechanisms in the brain, in chemistry, biology, and anatomy. All of those things go into that detail. That's what I want. This is reflecting your own personal research into the bodily mechanisms that produce thirst and the behaviors that we engage in to satisfy thirst, and then all the signals and what that we use to determine whether we're still hungry or whether we're satiated or satiated. I could never get that word right. When we're full and when we're not hungry anymore. Satiated, that's probably it. So looking at those two mechanisms, question 1 is about thirst, question 2 is about hunger. So that's what we have for this week. We have chapter 9, discussion quiz, chapter 10, discussion quiz. So I look forward to participating in those discussions, and they're always pretty lively when we talk about these sorts of things. And have a great week and be well, and I will see you next time.